All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's keynote event, At Home Diagnostics, the next wave of healthcare startups. This is a live event, so we would like to invite all of you to engage, to go into the chat or the question box, whatever you see, put in your engagement, chat, and put in your questions as well, because we have some amazing keynote speakers today, and they will be answering some questions for everyone. So my name is Mia Mushek, and I am honored and excited to be moderating this event today. I am an MBA candidate at the SC Johnson School of Business here at Cornell, as well as being the incoming president of the Entrepreneurship and Venture Capital Club at Johnson. So I'm very thrilled to be a part of today's event, and we have three fantastic keynote speakers and entrepreneurs who are Michael Stein, Lee Jung, and Param Kulkarni. So welcome, gentlemen. We are very excited to have you here today. And a little bit more about today's event. So imagine that you can have at-home diagnostics. So you can have diagnostics and testing right in your home without ever having to leave it. So you would be more proactive about your health, possibly. And today's biotech and health tech entrepreneurs are betting that you would say, yes, you would love to have these sort of tests at home. So today we're going to be discussing topics such as the opportunities available and growth forecasted in the direct-to-consumer diagnostics, as well as unique challenges facing startups in the customer-driven healthcare market. And of course, we would also like to provide some resources and tools to help innovators and startups in the consumer diagnostic field. So today's event is hosted by the Bio Entrepreneurship Initiative. Now, this initiative offers Johnson MBA students, as well as doctoral life scientists from across Cornell campuses, such as the Will Cornell Medicine Schools, College of Veterinary Medicine, College of Engineering and Agriculture and Life Sciences, as well as Cornell's tri-institutional partners, the opportunity to immerse themselves in real-world startup creation. So participants will receive tools, training, connections that they need to launch their own life science startups throughout this certificate program. And it is offered through the Samuel Curtis Johnson Graduate School of Management and features hands-on venture development practicum, and helps these participants join and their future leadership roles in startup communities. So for more information, I would like to invite anybody interested in those different programs to go and visit Entrepreneurship at Cornell website, which should be posted pretty shortly in the chat window for everybody to see as well. So without further ado, and pardon me, it's David Stein. Yes, thank you, David. So I'm excited to introduce once again our different panelists. And starting with David, I apologize about, I apologize about your name there. Yeah, but I would like to introduce you and have you tell us a bit more about yourself and your company.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for having me. Yeah, my name is David Stein. I actually did the Cornell Tech Johnson MBA program 2019 to 2020. And we launched ASH out of Cornell Tech's Startup Studio and won the pre-seed funding through Cornell Tech. And we actually launched as a direct-to-consumer at-home testing company for sexually transmitted infections focused on the LGBT communities. But COVID hit kind of as we launched, and we realized we had spent the year prior kind of building all the services, the platforms, the technology, and the relationships to do at-home testing for anyone. And so we decided to pivot a little bit and start to sell our platform and our technology to provider organizations to enable them to do remote diagnostics for their patient populations. And that was about 12 months ago. So since then, we sold to over 15 enterprise partners in the healthcare space, doing over 100 different types of diagnostic tests from at home. Thanks for having me.
That's wonderful. And thank you very much for being here. Once again, I apologize about calling you Michael. So thanks for being here, David. And next, I would like to have Lee introduce himself and tell us a bit about your company.
Thanks so much, Mia. So hi, everyone. My name is Lee. I completed my PhD at Cornell in mechanical engineering back in 2014 with a minor in biomedical engineering. I am now CEO of Vitascan, which we started in late 2016, early 2017. Vitascan is a personal nutrition company. We make laboratory quality tests that analyze key nutrition markers from a finger stick of blood. And then we combine this data with personalized advice, professional advice to help people make better health decisions. And I'm sure we'll, get into this. This is kind of the reason for having this session is for us, I think, nutrition is something that everyone recognizes is important to our personal health. But to truly understand your status, what impacts you the most, that's really challenging right now, right? Like how many people, if I ask you if you knew your nutritional status, how many of you could actually answer that question right now? And that's why, with kind of a confluence of a lot of things, including COVID, we're really excited about the potential for this, for at-home testing. And that's going to be a key part of our business strategy going forward as well. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lee. And last but most certainly not least is Param. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mia, of course. Hi, I'm Param. I'm based in New York City. I was a runway postdoc at Cornell Tech in 2019 and 2020. My startup is called Aware Health, short for Aware, and it is focused on building an at-home diagnostic for different mental health disorders like depression, body dysmorphia, related disorders as well. The problem we're really solving is trying to reduce the duration of untreated illness. We know that on average, it takes a decade to start receiving treatment for a mental health disorder, and we want to change that. So we want to change that and give people access to their assessments whenever they like, so they can start treatment, start taking action early. So we are building an at-home test kit that uses data that we as individuals in the digital world leave behind on, for example, social media platforms or on our online searches, and mine that data for diagnostic biomarkers for mental health. So we are building an AI-based technology to provide this digital diagnostic to people directly. And it's funny, we started off initially by trying to partner with kind of the opposite story of what David was sharing. We started by partnering with mental health companies who provide treatment. So they provide therapy or they're providing telepsychiatry to provide this as an additional test that their care providers can use. But we realized that it was better to just provide this direct to consumer, and that's our focus right now. So yeah, I'll stop there. Happy to go into more details later.
Wonderful. Yeah. So thanks again, gentlemen, for being here. I'm really excited to chat about this. And so I would like to talk initially and to start off really about your customer discovery, because you all mentioned a few different aspects that you're all exploring in customers and home diagnostics. So possibly starting with David, how did you first discover that there was a space in here and the problem that there is and the opportunities that there are? And then what made you choose really to pivot? Because you did mention COVID-19 as well. So could you talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we actually came together as a mostly queer founding team, and all had personal pain points in accessing sexual health, namely or specifically sexual health testing. And so we came together at the Cornell Tech program with the idea of making, STI testing more accessible and more inclusive, and honestly did a ton of customer discovery in person pre-pandemic, kind of walking around New York City and asking people about sexual health testing, and learned a ton, more or less, that sexual health testing is hard to access for anyone, not just the LGBT community, but maybe more so for that community. And so we decided to launch specifically with STI testing for LGBTQ plus individuals. But what happened, related to COVID was just that we started to sell these at-home testing kits on the direct-to-consumer side in the start of the pandemic, where everyone was being told to socially distance, distance and stay home. And so it was a very hard thing to sell. People weren't going out and hooking up with each other, and we didn't have tests to sell. And so we also realized at the same time that providers across the board could not bring their patients in person, be it for the lab testing or actual visits, and they were moving to telehealth. So we decided to test out. We did a 1-month test period where we were like, let's try sell STI testing and PrEP testing, PrEP being the once daily pill to prevent HIV, which you have to get tested quarterly for to stay on, and tried to sell it to an academic hospital system in New York City, to 2 telemedicine companies and a public health department. And all 4 of those pilots sold in that first month. And we were like, oh my goodness, we are on to something. And I guess the rest is really history. It just made sense to kind of continue down that path. And we view it that, we started in this space to make sexual health more inclusive and accessible, but now we get to make all of healthcare more accessible and inclusive by bringing, these tests and at-home health into the home and make it kind of virtual first and remote.
And that's great. And also the ideal scenario, isn't it? All 4 of them. So that's great. That's such a home run. And so Param, for yourself, you mentioned you kind of went about the opposite direction as David. Could you talk a bit about that journey?
Yeah, I think I would say that we are in the earlier stage in general in the customer discovery phase. The reason for a quick transition to the opposite direction was when we tried to approach companies which provide therapy networks, either that could be through a hospital who has their own psychiatry department, or it could be through private companies like Talkspace or Ginger, or other large teletherapy companies, what we realized is that we were hitting a wall in terms of getting a pre-approved test to work across networks of providers. There was a large amount of pushback from providers wanting to get certain approvals done for testing, and we're really not building a clinical test. We're building a preclinical test, right? That means this is important for people to get an understanding of before they want to see a physician, before they want to see a clinician. And that's why we decided to pivot towards selling the test directly to consumers. The second major event that happened was during September. There was a lot of debate or questioning, at least, around how social media companies are using our data and how that is affecting mental health, whether it's influencing positively, negatively, whether it's a causal influence or it's something that is just reflective of our mental health. And we saw that parents and teenagers were increasingly focused on that topic. And that was another kind of hint we took in moving towards direct-to-consumer model focused on parents this time.
That's great. And you also brought up a very good point, both of you did, about listening to the consumer as well, and how important that is, and the customer discovery phase through that. And so for Lee, for yourself, going into nutrition, how did you decide to focus on that? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, with nutrition, before I get into that, I like to just point out that, the 3 panelists here look at what we're focused on: sexual health, mental health, and nutrition health. This is a category of health and wellness where truly the current medical system that the US has I don't think is equipped to address these problems. And so it's not a coincidence, right, that we're all kind of pushing our way into at-home care where we can directly help the people that we want to. And then going back to our question, Mia, with nutrition health, where we started there was we were thinking about what are hidden health consequences. Nutrition, like I mentioned before, something that people are aware of, but very few people really understand truly what their personal nutrition status is. And even now, it's not something that traditional doctors pay that much attention to. We've talked with a lot of expectant moms, collegiate athletes who just get so frustrated because they care about nutrition. Something is either wrong with them, either they're sleeping 12 hours a day and still feeling tired, or as an expectant mom, you want your unborn child to start their life in the best possible way. And when you're trying to seek advice about what is the best nutrients for you to take in, a lot of them tell me that their doctor doesn't really know what to say. They're just saying, just take what you can take, eat what you can eat, and that's fine, right? And so there's this sort of pent up frustration, I think, from the consumers, where they know nutrition is important for them, but they're not getting the support that they're really looking for. And for us, it really did kind of take a roundabout way. Pre-COVID, we weren't focused on the home nutrition, home diagnostic side of it. We were a lot more clinical, looking at pediatrics, where we actually have sold our test for research use, and we're collaborating with children's hospitals and blood banks to test out this device more on the clinical side. But once COVID hit, it gave us an opportunity to take a step back, reassess my original assumptions, and just go out there and talk to as many people as possible to really understand, okay, this is what these assumptions of mine were wrong, were incorrect, and this is where the need truly is, and this is the path, the market path that we can take to to address the problem at its source.
No, and that's really so valuable, and especially recognizing those opportunities to pivot and following those opportunities as well. It takes so much flexibility, especially as an entrepreneur. And it's something that I think all of you have touched on and are really hitting the nail on the head on as well. And talking a little bit about the pandemic, just primarily about at-home COVID tests. And do you think that having these at-home tests has opened up the possibility in a lot of Americans' minds about at-home diagnostics and those possibly being a future way of analyzing your health or anything?
Yeah, happy to start here. I mean, absolutely. I think we've seen the entire, like all of these stakeholders in the value chain, I guess, just shift towards adopting and embracing at-home testing. So much so that, pre-pandemic, us trying to sell at-home testing kits for STIs, the kind of questions we were getting was, why would I do this at home when I can do it at the doctor's office? Like, is the efficacy the same? Am I going to get the same kind of outcomes? All that kind of stuff. To our partners that we're selling into, primary care practices, academic medical systems, telemedicine companies, having their patients ask them and say, hey, we don't want to come in. Can you send us an at-home testing kit? We test for COVID at home. We test for allergies at home. We test for nutrition, et cetera. And so now they're actually requesting it from their providers and doctors. And I think two other kind of political tailwinds from COVID that have shifted is the Biden administration mandated that all public and private insurers cover PrEP, which is, again, the once daily pill to prevent HIV, and the services associated with it, which is testing. And so once that kind of comes into fruition, we'll see payers adopt kind of the reimbursement for these at-home tests. We've seen that on a large scale, most recently with COVID testing, at-home COVID tests. Payers have to reimburse for these at-home COVID testing. And then in super liberal states like California, Governor Newsom signed a bill late last year called SB 306, which mandates private and public insurers to cover actually at-home testing kits, the physical shipping or the physical kit shipping to and from a customer for HIV and STI prevention. And so we're just seeing huge industry shifts from everyone from the provider, the consumer, the payers, et cetera, to adopting at-home testing.
I'll just echo a few things. I mean, everything David said basically lands with our experience as well, especially on the topic of the types of questions that we were getting from people pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? Like when we first came on the scene, this was right when Theranos was kind of collapsing, right? And so we were getting a lot of questions about the efficacy, accuracy. Why would somebody do this at home? Is it really, is the technology really there? And now when for most of us, it's really hard to put on real pants these days, right? It's the whole ecosystem has shifted to wanting to do as much as possible in the home. And I think, something that I've found is that for maybe the first time in this space, there's this alignment of interests, where the healthcare system, the medical system, there's a lot of, awkward incentives placed there. But now there are doctors who I speak to where they don't, things that can be done, like a hematologist, just to give an example, a hematologist who I spoke with sees a lot of people with bleeding disorders, and a good portion of the patients that he sees, it turns out that they have iron deficiency, and they need to come into the lab to do the test. And really, the only thing the doctor needs to do is tell them, go take some more iron supplements. And now, they don't want to spend their time seeing those types of patients because there's just the in-person time is more important elsewhere. And so if that patient can now do the test at home and then through telehealth or a simple phone call get the same level of response, then that just makes the whole process so much more efficient.
Yes, it's so true. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think absolutely that is one of the driving forces. There's another driving force, for example, is 23andMe going public mid last year, which just provide at-home tests, and some of them are FDA cleared. And I would add to that is that there is a unique challenge in mental health, that there is no currently established test for mental health that is not self-administered through a survey. So we have different surveys for different disorders, but there is no there is no biomarker-based test for mental health. So there's a simultaneous process of discovering a test. And because of that, we have focused on testing for symptoms rather than disorders directly, because symptoms apply to multiple disorders. And so that's how I think about that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And so to echo a little bit of that, this is a perfect transition into, we got a question from Melissa, who is a 1990 grad with nutrition and biochem. So she says, I work for a tech company to train patients on medical devices. We use a cloud sharing platform for medical data. So the question is, how do you address HIPAA or HIPAA and telehealth messages / video and text messages? And I know, Lee, you mentioned briefly telehealth and how there are opportunities there. So once again, the question is, how do you address HIPAA and telehealth messages, video, and text messaging?
Sure. So it's actually an interesting situation that we have here. Sorry, I forget the name of the person who asked the question, but the way that I understand the system is that nutrition, if it's connected to a clinical issue, then yes, you have to address the entire HIPAA process and make sure that you kind of fall within the limitations of what you can do there. I admittedly don't have that much experience on the clinical, on the HIPAA side, because for us, the focus is on more general health and wellness. If you're working with registered dietitians who are in their private practice, that is more of a consultation type of service. And so, if you're really just focused on making sure that your nutrition levels are optimal, you really don't need to worry too much about kind of digging too deeply into the kind of clinical medical side of things. You can, the supplements, it becomes a lot simpler of a story to tell from a market and business perspective. I don't know if that actually really answered the question, but the short version is we're kind of more focused on the space of nutrition that does not require that level of HIPAA compliance.
Sure, definitely. So I love that there's so many opportunities, is what I'm hearing, within this within this space, really, and within this market. And as everybody aligns, there will, of course, also be increased competition. So we have a question from Ali Wickland, And this is for all of you or any of you who'd like to answer it. So do you have any direct competition in your focuses? And how do you address the competitive aspect to developing a startup? So this can be about your specific company and then also for entrepreneurs in general.
I'm happy to start there. I think first and foremost, and I say this to investors all the time as we're currently fundraising, is this market is so huge, and there's going to be multiple winners in this space, and there's space for it. I mean, just with us three panelists alone, we're all focusing on entirely different kind of verticals, although I would love to provide both your companies some part of an at-home testing service, but it's just such a huge space and there's going to be multiple winners. And I think in our space specifically, in selling kind of the B2B side of enabling these providers in a white labeled way to do at-home testing, we have a few direct competitors. And I think what's made us super successful is two things. One, we started on the direct consumer side. And so we have the experience of our providers in that we know what patients need and want to be able to get through a testing process. And so we've optimized, in my opinion, and I would say in most of our customers' opinion, kind of the best in class at-home testing experience, both in a physical sense and a digital sense, to enable patients or users, whatever you want to call them, to get through the testing process. And two is really relationships. So what's key to kind of Ash's competitive differentiation is just that we've spent the last 2 years getting to know the different labs in the space that specialize in at-home self-testing. They've done the validation work for these self-testing lab-developed tests. And so if you sign up to do work with Ash and have us enable your remote diagnostics, we have access to best-in-class labs in the nation through an API integration and can turn you on. So the go-to-market is super quick. We can turn you on within a couple of weeks and get you testing for hundreds of different types of diagnostics. So I think, yeah, just on the highest of levels, this is such a huge space and it's only growing and there's going to be multiple winners.
So maybe I actually want to follow up with David on this. David, you and I should have another conversation maybe offline. In terms of the way that we, position ourselves in the market, again, to echo David's point, huge market potential. Personalized nutrition by itself is a rapidly growing space. And then even within that, there's this subcategory of active nutrition monitoring, right? So that's exactly where we land, where people are actively testing and tracking their personal nutrition status. That's a $14.5 billion market by itself, right? Where we differentiate is, I think basically all of the other companies out there in this space offer at-home sample collection. And then you send that sample to a lab to do the analysis, and then you get that result back. That could take, maybe a few days to a few weeks. And there are, kind of issues involved with that. We are developing our own tests that are 10 minutes finger stick tests so that you can completely test yourself and get your results and, connect with someone on your smartphone through the app to get the professional feedback on what those results mean. And so I see the space as needing both types of tests, right? But the sort of send out lab test, that would be good for kind of getting comprehensive panel level feedback. But then when you want to track things on a more regular basis, if you want to test yourself weekly or even monthly, right, it becomes pretty onerous to have to order these lab kits, get them sent to you, and then kind of go through that process because it's pretty expensive too. And so having both methods of testing in place is the way to, I think, fully service the customer base and improve everyone's personal health.
And Param, have you had similar experiences? Do you believe the space is very big, that there's space for both at-home, all-inclusive, I'll call it, testing where everything is done there, and as well as send away testing?
Absolutely. I think mental health is only a small fraction of the physical health or physical fitness space that it, in terms of the size of the market. So I think that there is a lot of space even in how the existing market size is calculated, and B, it is growing every quarter. So I think there is going to be more space for multiple companies to provide these type of tests. Right now, as I'm seeing it, there are a few companies, specifically in our market, who provide monitoring tools for parents to watch their child's online activity. They do not provide any tests beyond that in terms of understanding how that activity might be affecting the child, or are there any predispositions that are revealed in that activity for mental health disorders in the future. So that's kind of where we come in. So I would say that that's the type of direct competition we have right now.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. And so I have another question from Alicia. And so I think this ties in for all of you at whatever phase you're currently at in your startup journey. And so hers is specifically for David, but I would love for all of you to kind of pitch in on this. So her question is, she says, "Thanks so much, David. I love what Ash Wellness is doing and have been following your journey." So you have a fan out there, which is wonderful. But she says, "I was wondering how you went about pricing for the pilots." And for all of you, if you would talk a bit about how you are trying to figure out that pricing model that you're going to be participating in or already are.
Yeah. Honest answer is for the pilots, we really were just making sure that we could cover our costs. And so we were pricing them pretty inexpensively, and with the thought process of like, we have to prove out this model first and foremost, and then we'll figure out what structure makes most sense to really scale this and make money. But I think two things we've learned since then, kind of fast forward 12 months, is that it was actually worthwhile kind of pricing it to start to the point where like we wanted to sell the contract more than make a ton of money off of it. In that we're now doing over 10,000 kits a month, and that pricing makes sense, and we can, effectively hit scale based on that pricing. The other thing is there's experts in this space that, figure out how to help you kind of price and structure different contracts and stuff. And we've only now kind of started to do that and figure out what the optimal kind of contract looks like and what's easiest to sell. But my major takeaway of it all is that time kills deals, and especially on the B2B side. And so whatever makes pricing the most simplest and easiest for everyone to understand and just wrap their head around has been probably our most successful kind of insight out of all of this, is that, we just want to close a contract very quickly, get it signed, and start doing the work.
Yeah, I would add, to that is, I think the pricing strategy varies across the life cycle of the company greatly. What we did, a few things in the initial stages, is we asked for, in return of doing the test, we asked for a testimonial, sometimes a video testimonial or an audio testimonial, and made the test available for free. And that was very more valuable for us at that time, compared to getting a price in return. Another thing that comes to mind is one strategy we adopted for this testing is we provided a scholarship. We wanted to make sure, one of the challenges with at-home diagnostic is that they tend to be inequitable. And to kind of alleviate for that, we provided scholarship programs for families who want to apply for that, so that they could get the testing done at a very low cost or no cost.
Sure. And then for Lee, can you talk us through a bit of your thought process and what your company went through, or if you're still going through that process, how you're approaching that?
On the topic of pricing with these pilots, Yeah, so it's, I mean, David and Pram brought up some excellent points on that. It all comes down to what's the point of the pilot? What is the value that you're hoping to get out of this? If it's, like just to either validate your product or do some market validation, right? Then the price probably doesn't, if it's to build relationships, the price probably doesn't matter too much. And that's the approach that we took early on with some of these pilot studies with pediatric hospitals and blood banks. We're not making that much money out of it, but it's really to demonstrate that this system can be integrated and there is clinical value in what we're providing. And then going down the road, I'm guessing this is probably the case with, to some degree, with David and Pram too. We're in a fortunate situation where we can look at what's already out there, like the Everly Wells or these other companies that are providing at-home test kits, laboratory send-out test kits. And just to take Everly Well as the example, right? You can buy a kit from them for maybe $100, $200. You can sign up for a subscription package for, I don't know, like $600-700 a year to get, say, 4 of them. And we can start there, right? Like we know we can beat those prices. And we know people are willing to pay those prices right now. So there's a lot of margin to be able to work through in between that.
Yes, and that's another good point of actually some advantages of having competitors in the field as well, and being even a second mover, so to speak, in the field, is that you do get to look at those and take advantage of those. So I believe all of you guys did bring up either trying to, like break even with the testing, especially at the beginning, or, looking at scaling and further profit. So that is one issue that a lot of startups have in the beginning and a challenge that they have is trying to balance these different aspects of the business. So other than that initial financing, what other challenges did you all face when you were initially starting your company? And how did you overcome them as well?
There have been so many challenges, but I think, I say this all the time to founders that are just starting or, people kind of considering new ventures at a small startup, is that it really is all about the team. And so I have 3 co-founders, myself, obviously, Kyle Waters, who is a MBA from 2020 as well, Nick Semper, who did his master's in computer science at Cornell Tech, and Mio Akasako, who did her master's in data visualization at Parsons with a combined program at Cornell Tech. And what was crucial to kind of us getting through any of the challenges that we face, and there were a lot to just getting this up and running and going and scaling and stuff, is that we all had complementary skill sets, and effectively we could get everything we needed to get done with just us 4. And we survived like that for over a year before we hired anyone. And so it really just came back to our co-founding team and the ability or the skill sets that we all had to basically build what we needed to build to get it off the ground.
Yeah, so to maybe I'll say a few words here too. Absolutely, having a good team that you can work with, and I think for me the most important thing is team members who are willing to challenge you. They're willing to challenge your assumptions. In my career, both at Vitascan and before that, I've experienced both. I've worked with people who I would say were more enablers of my pre-assumptions. I had one person who basically said that if the technology works, I can sell it. And I believe that, right? And well, guess what? The technology worked, they could not sell it. And so it's so crucial to be able to have people that you can just talk to who are willing to put that time and effort into it to really question every single assumption that you're making, and force you to go, tying this back to our earlier conversation, force you to do more customer discovery, do more product market fit. Like that should be 90% of the time that you're spending as an entrepreneur, is talking to other people to really understand what the needs are. And even when you're starting to get people excited about what you're doing, don't get too blinded by that, right? Really dig into that. Always, in a sense of trying to prove them wrong, right? Like, no, you don't want to buy my product, and see what they say, and try to figure out, does this really hit home with the customers that you have? So a couple of points there, I guess it kind of bled into each other, but yeah, having that great team that can question you, that's willing to question you, but then also never stop doing the customer discovery process.
Yeah, I think those are, that kind of stood out to me. The team is like everything, especially in the initial phases. Having someone with complementary skill sets also, I think, is a great value add in the team. What I would add to that is also having some type of special interest in the problem that we're trying to solve. So having a strong reason to go after that problem is kind of what has kept our team together throughout the different challenges that have come to the startup. And without that common interest, we would have easily either split apart or done something else, and would not even be able to pivot to a different approach, which we did. So I think that's something I would definitely add to it.
Yes, definitely. Those are all extremely good points. And so when it came to finding these team members, especially some initial team members that you found, how did you go about finding them? How did you end up either questioning them or making sure that they were a right fit for your company to join the team?
I can kick it off. I was, my kind of looking back at how I did this, my realization is that it's better to take more time than less on this. What I did personally was I just started to go to a lot of conferences. This was happening during COVID. So I was attending a lot of virtual conferences, and our founding team is completely remote. So I met people through these conferences, starting to figure out where there is chemistry. And I had kind of the complementary skill set in mind. So for example, my co-founder, I was looking for experienced mental health clinician who also has interest in startups and wants to join a founding team. So I was attending conferences where I could meet people like that. And initially we hit it off with a few. I did hit off with a few people and started with doing a project with them without much hard commitment, just a 1 or 2 month project to see how things go, how the working chemistry is. Do we really feel confident? And then kind of continue to a more involved role. In my case, I couldn't really find anyone in my own personal network, my friends who I knew for a long time who were interested. But that's many times that turns out to be the space where people meet their co-founders.
Definitely, yes, thank you. And do you other gentlemen have any other thoughts on how you went about this?
Yeah, I can speak to both, our founding team, and then beyond that, since we've done quite a bit of hiring recently. But for the founding team, I agree with what's just been said around kind of doing some test project type work together to start. And that's how we all started together, was like, let's see if we actually like working together, and we work well together, and kind of all that kind of stuff. And then I think beyond that is also just having, in terms of a founding team, similar values. So we spoke about stuff other than work, and just kind of understood what everyone's 5 to 10 year plan was, and the things we really cared about, and came together around those different values. And there were definitely people that I spoke to in the way beginning that, for better or worse, I'm glad that we didn't end up founding a company together, because we really, the people that I did start this company with, we have very similar values and want the same things 5 to 10 years from now, both for Ash and for ourselves. I think beyond that, for hiring a team, one thing that we do in all of our application kind of processes for getting a job at Ash is ask people why making healthcare more accessible and inclusive is important to them. And so just really trying to get to people that care about, what we're doing and the mission we're going after beyond a paycheck or equity in the company or whatever it may be. And we have the most absolutely stellar 20-person team right now. I think partly due to that, because we found people who really care about the mission that we're going after.
Yeah, that's great. And having those morals and those values aligned, as well as the long-term plan, is a very, very good point. So to go back to the testing and the testing kit, we have a question from Terry, and they're asking, how do you handle the false negative and positive results? So false negative, positive results. Do you have advice patients to discuss with their physicians? Or also, do you advise patients to discuss with their physicians? So I guess the first is, it's a two-part question. The first part of the question is false negative, or in anybody else's cases, tests that didn't go quite the way that they thought that they were going to go. How do you approach that? As well as, do you have advice for patients and their physicians and speaking to them, I guess, about at-home diagnostic tests and possibilities?
I can kick off here really quickly. I mean, I think any testing, be it at-home testing or in-lab collection, there's a risk for false positives and false negatives, and it's just a part of the game. I think it's important to know that, to remember that if there's, we do a ton of sexual health testing, so HIV testing specifically. And if there is what we call an initial positive result, our providers and most state laws require kind of a confirmatory test to be done. And so that's what often happens when there's, kind of high risk tests that are being run that require, somewhat intensive follow-up treatment. And so we definitely recommend kind of those confirmatory tests to be done. And it's just part of a risk of, playing in this testing game. Beyond that, in terms of speaking to providers, all of our tests are done with a provider partner. And so it just is a part of the overall kind of end-to-end solution that we provide. So it's less kind of a question for us, but probably more for Lee on the rapid side.
Yeah, sure. So I can speak to that. It's there's a few things in place to protect against that. In our case, we have to get regulatory clearance to sell any of our tests, right? And a part of getting that regulatory clearance is that we can demonstrate we have such a low error rate in terms of false positives or negatives that that is an acceptable risk that the person is taking. But also in our specific case, our tests, one of the technical advantages that we have of our tests is that they are fully quantitative. So we're giving you an actual number instead of a positive or negative, based on your nutrition status. And so, in that case, we're talking more about how accurate are we compared to a reference laboratory test, and we have to demonstrate, 90-95% accuracy. In terms of the use case for this, to the question, a lot of these situations, if they are connected to sort of clinical care, the point of care test, that initial test, is often going to be a screening tool, right? So you might not be actually allowed to formally diagnose something based on that test. And I think David kind of touched on this too. You can only say, through the screening tool, we identified this thing, get that confirmed with your physician. On the nutrition side, it is a little more of an interesting space. Again, right, the physician probably doesn't really know too much about nutrition unless it's an actual clinical problem. And so a lot of the management, a lot of the care and treatment that you can get would be more through your registered dietitian, or well, in the majority of cases, it will be, we would recommend that you connect with a registered dietitian, or we work through registered dietitians to help you understand what your test results mean and what you can do about it.
I would echo the same thing in terms of like in our tests, we make it clear in the messaging that this is a predisposition test or a preclinical test. So it is not really diagnosing someone with a mental health disorder, but telling them about the risks that may lie in the future. And because it's also a quantitative test, it's a test that we are designing as a company. We have the ability to tune for precision versus recall. And in this case, tuning more, having less around false negatives is preferable, because we definitely don't want to lose anybody. Going back to the initial problem of having a long duration of waiting before somebody starts to receive treatment, we want to make sure that we have as high of a recall as possible. So that's kind of how we think about it. Also, to in terms of presenting the result, one of the challenges in presenting the result is that people are seeing the result in isolation by themselves, and sometimes it is hard to interpret that. So we offer a partnership with providers, mental health providers, who can help them understand what the next step should be, how high of a risk it is that the test has identified, and what they should be doing about it.
That's wonderful. And it brings up really good points within the industry itself as well. All of you did. And so we have another question from Steve, and this is more about the industry in general and possibly some directions that it's going into. So Steve was asking, what changes are needed with insurance companies and Medicare/Medicaid in order to provide greater acceptance of these types of home diagnostics?
I can start out there because I spend 50% of my day every day trying to figure out this answer and answer this question. But what often so let me set up the stage a little bit. If we're running a PrEP panel, for example, so PrEP, the ones that you pill to prevent HIV, we have to run HIV, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, creatinine, and Hep B usually. The Medicaid line items to bill all those things add up to about $250. When one of our partner labs bills, let's just say Medi-Cal, which is Medicare of California, one of the managed Medicare programs, their reimbursement rate for a $250 panel is around $66, what they actually get back from the state. So they have to cover their costs. And then on top of that, we haven't even thought about the physical kit, what it costs to put that together, and then shipping back and forth. So I think a couple of things need to happen, but first and foremost are CPT codes for the physical kit for shipping back and forth to a customer. And for those insurance companies to realize oftentimes, the adherence for patients is going to be higher if we can ship a kit to their house and it lands on their doorstep. I talk to virtual first primary care providers all the time who are doing telehealth consults or visits, and then asking people to go to a Quest or LabCorp in-person blood draw or lab visit, and 30 to 40% of those visits go unfulfilled. People just don't follow through. So just recognizing from an insurance point of view that we have to start introducing kind of policies and CPT codes specifically for people like Ash and our lab partners to make money to affect kind of change in this whole space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one way that I look at it is, to echo David's point on shifting how we view this space, you have to move away from treating things after something goes wrong to prevention, right? And to looking at improving wellness. And honestly, I don't have much faith that the insurance reimbursement system is going to do that. There are new ways of like employer insurance, where there are large companies that are taking on insurance within their own system with a improved focus on health and wellness. And I think that's a great thing. And that is probably something that I think it is going to need to expand and will expand going to the future. Because I think the traditional insurance system is just too embedded, I think, to make any dramatic changes. In our case, it's also to kind of step away from dealing with the insurance at all. We kind of have this advantage where we're working with registered dietitians, and they have this issue too, because they go to school for years to get an RD degree, and yet they don't have the same allowances and abilities as a medical doctor. They can't order laboratory tests, and so they're frustrated by the system as well. But because of that, they primarily work in a cash business, right? You can just ignore the insurance. And so for us, it kind of solves a lot of issues where we can go into an existing business where people are used to dealing with cash and not getting reimbursed for a lot of things, and they're willing to pay for that because they in nutrition and health and wellness is important enough for them.
Definitely. So we have just 5 minutes left. This has flown by, and I really appreciate all of you being on here, and eCornell and the Bio Entrepreneurship Initiative do as well. So talking about Cornell and really just entrepreneurs in general, either within the space or any space in general, if you could give a word of recommendation to either new entrepreneurs or ongoing entrepreneurs who have their own startup, one piece of advice, and I know it'll be hard to narrow it down, but what might it be to them?
I would say that maybe I'll just kick it off. My biggest realization from my entrepreneurial journey is that never kind of ignore the process of getting customer feedback. So it's not a phase of getting customer discovery. It's a process that kind of needs to run on an ongoing basis, and the needs for that change depending on the stage of the company. But that's kind of the key driver for how the company grows.
Exactly that. And then building your skill sets, right? Like figuring out how to, what are the best ways to get in touch with people, how to make the most of, the 15, 20 minutes that you have with someone, what types of questions to ask, and understanding how to filter the information that you get. Because if you're doing things right, you're going to be getting overloaded with information every single day. And you have to make sure that you can process that effectively, right? And in our case, right, it's going from space to space, getting connected with people, and getting enough. It's going to be very noisy, right? The data that you get, and so it's getting enough data points so that you can kind of filter through the noise and understand the core truth that 9 out of 10 people are telling you, instead of kind of hanging on to that 1 out of 10 who is maybe the most excited about what you're doing, but is not representative.
Yeah, I echo definitely on the customer feedback side. I think there's no kind of like too early time to start testing if someone will buy your product or service or feature or whatever it may be. And so my biggest regret is that we didn't do that sooner, honestly, because we probably would have ended up on the B2B side earlier. But to really just put it in front of people and see if they'll hand over cash for what you're trying to sell them. And then I think the last thing is just picking something you're really passionate about. You're going to get rejections from customers, from investors, from people that you're trying to work with or hire or partners or whatever it may be. And so you just have to be really passionate about what you're doing to stick with it and stay in it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And you all mentioned before as well, building the team and having the right people around you. So that I really appreciate all of your sage words of wisdom and sharing your experience here today. for myself, as well as eCornell, Cornell, and the Bio Entrepreneurship Initiative, which once again, if anybody's interested, they can join or they can find out more information at the Entrepreneurship at Cornell website, as well as I believe our background crew. I want to thank them as well. But I believe they posted information about your companies on the chat, so we can find out more and reach out to you guys, I believe probably through your companies. So thank you very much for being here today. We really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.